Belarus is allowing migrants to enter Lithuania. And the reason for this is because the European Union has imposed sanctions on Belarus, and so Lukashenko wants to supposedly punish the European Union, of which Lithuania is a member. And the EU put sanctions on Belarus supposedly because Lukashenko is an evil, despotic tyrant. Now, when I first began to hear about the evil despotism of Belarus, I really didn't pay much attention on it, because anytime propaganda media outlets begin to bash a country that NATO doesn't like because it's an ally to Russia, I really take it with a grain of salt, because we have seen this story too many times. We saw this with Syria, we saw this with Saddam Hussein, and we all pretty much learned our lessons as to why we should not have knee-jerk reactions and just accept what the propaganda schemes want us to believe just because it says this one particular country is evil. So they love to say this one country is evil and you should hate it, but then you realize that the only reason why NATO hates this country is because it's close to Russia. And if we really didn't like tyranny and despotism, then we wouldn't be giving so much support to Saudi Arabia and to Turkey. So you really begin to quickly learn how to see through the BS and read between the lines. But when I first began hearing about Lukashenko and how bad he was, I did a little bit of Googling. I did a little bit of a Google investigation, and I found this documentary on, I think it was on DW or BBC. It was one of those European media outlets. And I saw this documentary, and it was on how bad Lukashenko is and how he is this evil tyrant. And I saw this video on the documentary showing a protest. And the protest had a bunch of little old ladies, and they're like, Lukashenko, you are bad. Lukashenko, bad. And later on, you see these same people, you see these same women. Some of them are old ladies. Some of them are kind of in their middle age. And they're sipping tea, complaining about Lukashenko. And I'm like, I mean, if this was like the revival of the Third Reich, you'd be in a camp. So I just don't really have this knee-jerk reaction to just accepting the whole propaganda statement, the whole narrative. Now, with that said, the EU has put sanctions on Belarus. And the event that sort of acted as a catalyst to this was that a plane that was stopped at Minsk had a journalist who was criticizing the Lukashenko government. This journalist was critical of Lukashenko's state. And so this political dissident was arrested. And so the EU said, well, you're putting dissidents in jail, or you're arresting dissidents. We're going to put sanctions on you. So Lukashenko pulls an Erdogan. He says, okay, our country shares a border with Lithuania. We're getting in all these migrants from Iraq. We're just going to allow them to enter Lithuania to punish you guys. We are going to punish you with the presence of migrants, because when migrants enter the country, you have to get the border control. You got to get the border security. And then all of a sudden, there is another thing that you got to worry about more than anything else, and that is the vicious nationalism that sparks as a result of the presence of these migrants. So these migrants come in, and the nationalists exploit the situation, and they begin to gain political ground. And this is something that terrifies political centrists and people who are center-left, or they're progressive, or they're just political moderates. So European countries that are a part of the EU, they don't want migrants. They don't want them. And there are various reasons as to why this is. For one, there's a lot of crime that will come out as a result of it. Of course, most migrants aren't criminals, but the problem is that you will have enough crime that it will spark political instability or a dramatic shift in the political system to where people will become more militaristic, they'll become more nationalistic, they'll become more right-wing, they'll become more xenophobic or jingoist, etc. So it's something that's very dangerous to the political establishment. If anything, the biggest friend for right-wing political parties is a huge flow of migrants. Having a huge flow of migrants is the best friend of people who are politically nationalistic and far right. That's what they want. They want those migrants to come in. Because as long as those migrants aren't coming in, everyone's fine. Nobody cares. No one is really worried about some migrants coming over to rape them or rob them or kill them or whatever. People aren't so worried about terrorism. But when you have this influx of migrants in your country and you walk outside of your house to go buy a bottle of wine, or you want to buy your French cheese, or you want to buy your Dutch cheese, or you want to go walk to the windmill to go get some fresh cow milk at the farm in the Netherlands, and you see a bunch of migrants walking around, I mean, you're going to be a little nervous. I remember years ago talking to someone that I knew who lived in Serbia. And he told me that when he walks out of his house and he goes to the city, he sees migrants everywhere. Now, he says they don't really cause any problems. He says, in fact, a lot of them are actually quite polite. But nonetheless, it's the perception that is effective. It's the perception that is dangerous. It's like the situation of illegal immigration in the United States. Most people who cross the border into the United States are not dangerous. Most of them are not criminals. Most of them aren't murderers or sicarios. Most of them are not a part of a cartel. Most of them are just desperate people who want to make money. That's it. They're just desperate people that want to make money. In fact, they're so desperate that some of them will walk hundreds of miles from Central America just to get to the border. But nonetheless, when you have a huge presence of illegals concentrated in a certain area, that gives leeway to certain political agitators to capitalize on the situation, exploit the situation, and give them more influence, more power, because people start getting scared. And then all of a sudden you have a handful of stories here and there of somebody got stabbed, somebody got raped, somebody got robbed. There was a shooting over here, etc., etc. And in some cases, these people were born here. But the criminals, that is, were born in the U.S. or they were born in a particular Western country. But nonetheless, the fact that they look like the illegal migrant, the fact that they may be from the same part of the world as these migrants, it still gives political leverage to those who want to advance a nationalistic or far-right ideology. Now, Lukashenko, it's very interesting. Lukashenko, he is doing exactly what Erdogan did. Allowed a bunch of migrants into Europe. Now, granted, Turkey did so in conjunction with Germany. There was a deal that Turkey and Germany made to allow these migrants in. And a lot of people in Europe didn't want them. Tons of people in Europe didn't want them. Millions of Europeans did not want these people to come in. How do I know that? Because so many parties that would have otherwise been considered fringe and crazy, they got substantial seats in European parliaments. The Forum for Democracy Party got a huge, substantial victory a number of years ago in regional elections. Of course, you have the AfD in Germany, the Austrian People's Party, the Austrian Freedom Party. They made it big just a few years ago or so. The Vox Party in Spain, big nationalist party, they made it pretty big a couple of years ago, which is fascinating because years ago I met the vice president of Vox at a dinner conference when I was in Madrid. I had no idea who this guy was. He actually came up and started talking to me because he heard my talk. I gave a talk in Spain on the importance of Christian militancy and the importance of Christian identity and all these things. And of course, I didn't come in there with the agenda of a nationalist. I went in there with the agenda of a Christian. But he liked what I had to say, and he said, he was Catholic and everything. And we had a good hour or so long conversation over dinner. And he said, "Oh, I'm the vice president of a political party." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I am. I'm a vice president of a political party." And I said, "What's the name of your party?" He said, "It's called Vox." And this guy who spoke to me, his name was Victor Rodriguez, I believe his name was. And he said, "Listen, if we don't deal with the migrants, then we're going to have blood on the streets." That's what he told me. And this was in 2015. This was in 2015 when the migrant crisis was at its peak. And he said, we could have blood on the streets. No, he didn't say we could. He said, we will have blood on the streets if we don't deal with this problem. And it's crazy. It really is crazy. He later told me that he was a member of a secretive Catholic paramilitary order. And I asked him if he wanted to do an interview about it with me, and he said, well, I have to speak to the superior of the order, and he never wanted to really talk to me after that. We did have one phone conversation when I got back to the States, but after that, it really didn't go beyond anything else. So his party didn't have a single seat in Parliament when I met him. And I said, well, do you have any seats? Do you have any success? And he says, right now we have no seats. This is what he told me. He says, right now we have no seats, but you wait. We will be victorious in Spanish elections. And I said, how many people in Spain are like you? And he said, and I'm not joking, his face was down like this. His eyes were looking right at me like a shark. And he said, millions. Just like that. Emphatic, just like that. Millions. Europeans are very different from Americans. Europeans politically are like super energetic. They're very, very emphatic. They're open. And the thing about European political ideologues, a lot of them don't mind going down that fringe road and pursuing victory. They don't mind. Whereas in the United States, you pretty much always have to join either Republican or Democrat to get what you want. The socialist fanatics, they got to go on the Democrat side. Right-wing fanatics have to join the Republican side. But, these people are trying to slowly and gradually change both of these parties towards that fanatical fringe element. And they are expanding the Overton window of what is acceptable political discourse. So when Erdogan in Germany had these migrants go into Europe, they were doing something that a lot of Europeans did not want. And now it looks like a majority of Europeans, or something very close to a majority, really don't want these people. And so and this is why I think Germany was behind it. The reason why I believe Germany supported the bringing in of all of these hundreds of thousands of migrants into the EU was because they wanted a catalyst towards greater European defense. Brexit happened in 2015, the same year of the migrant crisis. Britain votes to leave the EU. That gave the green light to the Germans to begin to say, hey, Britain doesn't care about us anymore, because Britain was the biggest financer for the EU's defense. So now Britain was going to leave. They knew Britain was on its way out. It already had one foot out the door. So the Germans say, we have to focus more on our own defense. Well, we need an event other than Brexit to bring more and more support for this from the general population. Migrant crisis. Now, what did the migrant crisis do? It basically gave the reason to make immigration control or immigration, or I should say, it gave the reason to Europe to make its border security into something closer to a united military force. Because remember, the EU for a while has been talking about making its own military. Of course, this would be a German-led pan-European military force. But the British always said, no, 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 no. The British didn't want it. The British are now gone. So now the Germans and the French can do their little Franco-German plan of, it's not really little, but they can do their Franco-German plan to create an EU military force. And so what that would do is it'll greatly integrate Europe closer together. That's the plan. Well, if every EU country has its own individual national border security, that's not really integrating the security forces of Europe into one single security force. So how do you do it? The borders. You have to make the borders more and more insecure. Turkey says, we're going to flood the EU with migrants. Oh my God, these evil migrants are coming. What do we do? Make the border security more and more integrated and more militaristic. There is a quote that I want to read to you guys. This is from Jean-Claude Juncker when he was the president of the EU Commission. And he said, he said this back in 2016. And it was in a speech that was entitled, and this is the title of Juncker's speech, A Europe That Defends. So this is what the speech of Juncker said, quote, "We need to know who is crossing our borders." And that's true. That's true. I'm not going to condemn him for these words alone, but we have to always read between the lines in order to understand what the intention is here. So look at what he says in the same speech. Quote, "Europe can no longer afford to piggyback on the military might of others or let France alone defend its honor in Mali." So in other words, we have to start becoming more international, as well as having an emphasis on border security. So there are some other interesting things that I want to show you guys here. Here is a recent quote from the European Commissioner for Migration, Dimitris Avramopoulos. "The current migration and security challenges know no borders and require a truly European approach, where Frontex used to be limited to supporting member states in managing their external borders. The new border agency will go beyond this. What we are creating today is more Europe." So the line that I want to focus on here is where he says, where Frontex used to be limited to supporting member states in managing their external borders, the new border agency will go beyond this. So the EU wants to go beyond just member states managing their own border security. And then he says, what we are creating today is more Europe. And that's just code word for more Germany. Because when they say Europe, what they're talking about is a EU system that is more and more led by Germany. So he says here, what we are creating today is more Europe to manage our external borders. So what they're trying to do is make the EU more and more of a unified state. How are they going to do that? Border security. The very idea of a threat to their borders. So they have this thing called Frontex, which is more and more becoming like its own military force. It is a EU security force, and it's going to be, it already is, the EU's internal and external border security. And this is going to make the EU more and more of a super state that is under one security apparatus. And so this is getting closer and closer to the idea of an EU military force. So this is really going in line with what the Germans want. The British can no longer be there and say, well, we don't want this. No, EU army, nope, we're going to put a veto on that. The British can't do that anymore. They're gone. They're no longer there. And the British, as I said earlier, were the biggest funders for the EU's defense. That's no longer the case. And because Germany has the biggest economy in the EU, Germany has the say-so. The British are no longer there. And the Germans are now going to be directing the route that Europe takes as far as its security goes and as far as its military apparatus goes. And there has been plenty of talk in the EU about an EU military force. And who's going to lead it? It's going to be the Germans. Why? Because they have the biggest economy. And the one with the biggest economy is the one that rules. So there you have it. A migrant crisis only empowers militarism, and it only empowers nationalism. And with Lukashenko allowing migrants to enter the EU, this only gives more and more of a justification for the EU to strengthen its new Frontex system. In fact, there is a quote from the head of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and she herself said it. She herself said that we are going to use Frontex to deal with the situation in Lithuania. Her own words are, quote, "We'll bring more support through Frontex. Your worries and your problems here in Lithuania are European worries and problems. We really stand by your side in this difficult time." So what is she doing? She's saying we're going to use Frontex to deal with the migrant situation in Lithuania, and by that, we are utilizing this pan-European security force, which it looks to me is really just a precursor to the ultimate plan, which is a pan-European military force led by the Germans. So there you have it, everyone. Those are my thoughts on this situation. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.